Millionaire's arrogant challenge turns into a shocking lesson. "Come here, boy. Show me how you play chess in the slums." Mrs. Victoria Whitman's voice rang through the grand living room of her Beverly Hills mansion, dripping with the entitlement of someone who had never worked a day in her life. The wealthy socialite was hosting a charity dinner. Ironic, considering she was now mocking the very people the event was supposedly helping. 17-year-old Diego Santos was there only to assist his mother, Carmen, the longtime maid of the S. Whitman estate. Carmen had spent 20 years scrubbing floors, polishing silver, and raising her son on a maid's salary. Tonight, she moved quietly through the glittering crowd of businessmen, politicians, and their jeweled wives serving champagne and hors d'oeuvre. But when Victoria decided to make her son the evening's entertainment, Carmen's heart sank. "Look at him," Victoria said smugly, gesturing toward Diego. "Let's see what this boy can do against someone who actually studied the game." The guests chuckled, their laughter muffled behind crystal glasses. One man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I bet he doesn't even know the knight moves in an L shape." Carmen clenched the silver tray in her hands. She knew her son's brilliance, but she also knew how cruel this room could be. She had seen Victoria grow from a spoiled girl into a cold, arrogant woman who thrived on belittling others. "Carmen, put that tray down," Victoria said, her tone falsely sweet. "Watch your son. This will be educational for both of you." But Diego wasn't rattled. He stood still, his deep brown eyes calmly scanning the room, the chessboard, and each amused face staring at him. At just 17, he understood something most of these people never would. Silence was powerful. And at this moment, silence belonged to him. There was a stillness about Diego, like the calm before a storm. His fingers moved slightly, as though he were already seeing the board in his mind. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady and unshaken. "Of course, Mrs. Whitman. It will be my pleasure." The guests exchanged curious glances. Something in his tone unsettled them. Victoria smirked, settling into a plush leather armchair like a queen preparing to watch a spectacle. "Excellent. I always play white, dear. It's a family tradition," she said, motioning toward the gleaming Italian marble chessboard. "I bet this will be the most expensive board you'll ever touch," State Representative Jennifer Mills remarked, half joking but uneasy. "Victoria, are you sure this isn't a bit cruel? The poor boy might be humiliated." "Nonsense," Victoria said with a dismissive wave. "This will be a story for him to tell. Imagine playing chess in a mansion." What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Diego had spent the last 8 years living and breathing chess. While other kids played video games, he studied openings, defenses, and strategies from dusty library books. He repaired an old computer just to watch matches of legends like Kasparov, Fischer, and Carlsen. By the time he was 14, he had memorized more than 200 openings and could recite 50 different defenses by heart. And now, all of that knowledge was about to collide with Victoria's arrogance. She moved her first pawn forward confidently. "E4. A classic opening we learned at Harvard," she said condescendingly. Diego's response was immediate. His hand moved without hesitation. "C5, Sicilian defense." The room grew quiet. The laughter died. This was not the move of a beginner. Carmen felt a chill run down her spine. She knew that look on her son's face, the calm, unreadable expression that meant only one thing. Someone was about to regret underestimating him. And as the first moves unfolded, it became clear. This was no joke. This was about respect, pride, and a lesson that money could never buy. It wasn't the move of a beginner. It was the move of someone who lived and breathed chess. "Interesting," murmured Congresswoman Mills, leaning forward. Victoria hesitated. 3 long seconds, just enough for Diego to see it. She wasn't a true player. She knew openings, not strategy. She played NF3, something she'd probably memorized at a country club. While she stalled, Diego's mind drifted back. 8 years. Earlier, at 9 years old, he'd found a ripped chess book in the trash behind the library. He hid it in his backpack and showed it to his mother. "Mijo, why chess?" Carmen had asked, worn out from scrubbing floors all day. "Because, Mom," he'd said. "The rich kids say they're smarter. I want to prove them wrong." They had no money, barely $600 a month for food and rent. No computer, no lessons. But Diego had the public library. Every day he'd walk 3 kilometers to study games in dusty books no one touched. Victoria finally played D3, timid, safe. Diego countered NC6, sharp, calculated. Each of his moves came fast, 5 seconds at most, like he was following an invisible script. "Our little helper is rushing," Victoria laughed, glancing at her guests. "In real chess, you think before you play." Diego smiled faintly and then did something unexpected. He slowed down. He rested his chin on his hand, pretending to think. 15 seconds later, he played G6, preparing his bishop. To the untrained eye, it looked careless, but to a real player, it screamed danger. "Fast dragon," Mr. Hamilton whispered, gripping his glass. "He's setting up a Sicilian dragon." Victoria blinked. "A what?" "It's aggressive," Hamilton said, "and deadly if you don't know it." Move after move, the atmosphere shifted. Diego wasn't just reacting, he was controlling the board. Every piece landed perfectly, like music written on marble squares. Carmen stood frozen in the corner. Her heart raced. She'd known her son was good, but this was something else. And for the first time since she'd met Victoria Whitman, she saw fear on the woman's face. By Diego's 10th move, Hamilton choked on his whiskey. A pawn sacrifice, simple to some, deadly to others. A trap was set. "Victoria," he said quietly, "this boy is no amateur." But Victoria waved him off. "Please, a few tricks from YouTube. This will be over soon." Then Diego rose from his chair. The room went silent. He walked to the corner where his mother stood. "Mom," he said softly, but everyone heard it. "Remember when you said I'd show them who we are?" Carmen's eyes filled with tears. She remembered. His 15th birthday, no cake, no money, just a promise from a boy who swore he'd change everything. "That young man has more class than anyone here," Congresswoman Mills whispered to her husband. Victoria tapped the table impatiently. "Shall we continue? I have places to be." But when Diego returned to his seat, he wasn't the same quiet helper. He was calm, confident, almost regal. His next move, a double threat, made Victoria freeze, protect the king and lose the queen. "Protect the queen and face checkmate." "That's not possible," she muttered, scanning the board in disbelief. Hamilton leaned in. "Victoria, you're being crushed by a kid who learned this game from library trash." Around the room, silence fell. Champagne glasses were set down, phones forgotten. Every eye fixed on the board, and Carmen knew that look on her son's face. The world was finally about to see the boy she'd always known, a genius hiding in plain sight. It was the same look he had when he was 12, the day he discovered the chess section at the public library. The same look he wore for 5 straight hours, studying legendary games on an old broken computer. The same look that made him wake at 5 a.m., solving tactical problems before school. Victoria finally moved, a desperate attempt to escape the trap, but it was already too late. Diego had calculated that possibility 6 moves ago. "Check," he said calmly, sliding his queen to a position that offered 3 different paths to victory. The room froze. The silence was almost physical. Victoria stared at the board, then at Diego, then back again. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with barely contained rage. She was being systematically dismantled by someone she had always considered beneath her. "You must have seen that sequence somewhere," she said, her voice tight. No one learns that on their own. For the first time since the match began, Diego smiled. You're right, ma'am. I learned it from Garry Kasparov. Kasparov taught you? Hamilton blurted out, incredulous. Not personally, Diego replied, calmly placing his next piece, a move that sealed her fate. But I studied all his documented games, 1,830 of them to be exact. He used this sequence against Karpov in 1984, Game 23 of the World Championship. Victoria scanned the room, seeking validation, but all she found were faces turned cold, unreadable. For the first time, the people around her were not impressed. They were quietly disappointed. Carmen stepped forward, her voice steady. My son woke up at 5 every morning to study before school. He walked 6 miles to the library because we couldn't afford internet. When our power was cut off, he stayed up solving chess problems by candlelight while I worked double shifts to keep food on the table. The room went silent. Even the sound of the expensive wall clock ticking seemed too loud. Diego looked at his mother, eyes shining with pride and determination, a bond so fierce it made some of the guests look away. Checkmate, he said softly, placing his queen down. Victoria froze, staring at the board as if willing the pieces to rearrange themselves. But nothing changed. When she finally looked up, Diego was watching her with calm, unshaken eyes, and the mood in the room had shifted entirely. The guests no longer saw a maid's son. They saw a mind they could not ignore, a boy who had just shattered every assumption they'd ever had about class, privilege, and genius. Victoria, on the other hand, felt something she had never felt before. Embarrassment. This was luck, she muttered, her confidence shattered. He must have memorized that sequence. Hamilton shook his head and walked to the board. Victoria, that boy just executed a Sicilian variation I've never seen in my 40 years of playing. That wasn't luck. That was mastery. Congresswoman Mills quietly raised her phone and began recording. She knew a moment worth capturing when she saw it, a wealthy, condescending woman being humbled by a boy she underestimated. I don't accept this, Victoria snapped, standing so abruptly she knocked over a few pieces. No one learns to play like that on their own. Someone trained him to humiliate me. Diego remained seated, calm and unshaken. Would you like a rematch? He asked. I can play anyone here, or all of you at once if you prefer. Gasps rippled through the room. The arrogance wasn't his. It was confidence, sharp and undeniable. You're being insolent, Victoria hissed. A boy from the slums doesn't speak to his superiors like that. Carmen stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. My son is not from the slums, Mrs. Whitman. We are a working-class family, and he's not being arrogant. He's telling the truth about his abilities. Something you seem incapable of doing about yours. The tension thickened. Guests shifted uncomfortably. They knew this was no longer just about chess. How dare you speak to me that way? Victoria snapped. Have you forgotten your place in this house? No, Carmen replied firmly. I remembered my worth. Hamilton cleared his throat, clearly unsettled. Victoria, perhaps it's time we admit the boy is extraordinary. But Victoria only laughed bitterly. Don't. You see? This was planned. Someone trained him to humiliate me. Finally, Diego stood. His voice carried a quiet authority that silenced even the most powerful people in the room. Mrs. Whitman, he said, the truth is simple. I didn't study to embarrass you. I studied because I dreamed of playing against people who respected the game, people who understood that talent has no color, no class, no last name. He paused, scanning each face in the room before speaking. When you invited me to play, saying it would be like playing in the slums, I thought this was finally my chance to prove I deserved respect. But now I see. It was never meant to be. Fair. You didn't want a match. You wanted a spectacle of humiliation. Congresswoman Mills lowered her phone, captivated by the moment. "How old are you, son?" she asked. 17? Diego replied calmly. "And how long have you been playing seriously?" 8 years. Mills turned to Victoria, her expression a sharp mix of disbelief and disappointment. "Victoria, you've just been defeated by a self-taught teenager. A teenager whose family works for you. A teenager you invited to this room as a joke." The weight of every gaze in the room pressed on Victoria. For the first time in her life, the faces around her weren't filled with admiration or envy. They were filled with judgment. I didn't know he played seriously," she stammered, but even she could hear the weakness in her voice. Hamilton leaned forward, irritation clear. "The issue isn't whether he played seriously. The issue is why you assumed he couldn't. Why did you think he'd lose? Because he's your maid's son? Because he's black? Because he doesn't have money?" The silence that followed was crushing. Diego calmly began resetting the pieces. On the board, each move deliberate. "Thank you for the game, Mrs. Whitman," he said evenly. "It was educational." When he finished, he stood and turned to his mother. "Mom, can we go? I have school tomorrow." Carmen removed her apron and nodded, but before leaving, she faced Victoria. "Mrs. Whitman, thank you. Tonight you showed me that. My son belongs in far better places than this." Mother and son walked toward the door. "Diego," Mills called after them, "are you interested in scholarships? I know universities that would love to have someone with your talent." Diego stopped and offered his first real smile of the night. "Very interested, ma'am." Mills handed him her card. "Call me Monday." Victoria stood frozen, unable to process what had just unfolded. In less than an hour, she had fallen from admired hostess to a symbol of arrogance exposed. When the door closed behind Diego and Carmen, an awkward silence remained. Hamilton rose first. "I think I'll take my leave as well," he said coolly. One by one, the guests departed, offering only cold farewells and disapproving glances. Victoria was left alone in the silent room, staring at the board where a boy she had dismissed as inferior had dismantled her pride. But what she didn't know was that this night was only the opening move of a much larger game. 6 months later, Diego Santos walked the halls of Stanford University on a full scholarship in engineering. Mills had kept her word, connecting him to opportunities that saw beyond money and last names. The story of that night didn't stay private. It went viral. 3 million views in just 2 weeks. Not from a hidden camera, but from Mills herself, who shared the story on social media. Headlines called it, "Young chess prodigy humiliates prejudiced millionaire." Comments poured in, "That woman deserved it. That boy deserves every opportunity in the world." The consequences were swift. Victoria Whitman became a social outcast. The golf club canceled her membership after complaints. 3 charities quietly removed her name. Even Hamilton, once a loyal friend, began avoiding her. "Victoria was always arrogant," Hamilton's wife whispered over dinner. "But humiliating a child? That's unforgivable." Meanwhile, Diego never sought revenge. He simply kept playing. Carmen, too, saw change. She was offered a supervisor position at a 5-star Santa Monica hotel, triple the pay, full benefits. Not charity, just long overdue recognition of her skill and professionalism. Diego went further. He launched a free online chess program for kids in underserved communities, pairing them with college mentors. In 6 months, over 1,200 students were learning strategy, not just for chess, but for life. "Chess taught me that every piece has value," Diego said in an interview with CNN. "And Mrs. Whitman taught me that sometimes people must lose everything before they learn what truly matters." When asked if he held a grudge against the woman who once tried to humiliate him, Diego smiled with the same calm confidence he had shown on that unforgettable night. Grudges are like useless pieces on the board. They only block your next. Move! I'd rather focus on what I can build. Victoria watched that interview alone in her sprawling mansion, now eerily quiet, stripped of the friends who had once filled its halls. For the first time, she fully understood what she had lost that night. Not just a chess match, but the chance to become a better person. Hamilton had called her once after the incident. His words were sharp but true. Victoria, you created this. Diego responded with the grace you should have shown from the start. The lesson rippled far beyond Beverly Hills. Diego proved to the world that true nobility doesn't come from a last name or a bank account. It's forged through adversity and revealed through character. He turned prejudice into purpose, humiliation into growth. Now, when Diego looks toward the future, he doesn't see limits imposed by others, only possibilities created by his own determination. Victoria had tried to diminish him to feel bigger, but in doing so, she exposed the truth. Greatness is measured by how many people you lift up, not by how many you tear down. In Carmen's modest home, a framed photo of Diego hangs proudly on the wall, him receiving his first academic honor at Stanford. Beside it is a certificate from the free chess program he founded, already transforming the lives of thousands of young players from underserved communities. These achievements were priceless, things no amount of money could buy and no prejudice could steal. In the end, Diego discovered the best revenge isn't to destroy those who underestimate you. It's to build something so extraordinary that their smallness becomes irrelevant. Victoria Whitman once tried to make him a spectacle. Diego Santos became an inspiration, and that is the difference between simply playing the game and changing it. If this story of resilience and justice moved you, subscribe for more powerful stories that prove true strength doesn't lie in privilege, but in turning obstacles into opportunities for extraordinary growth.